He was the face of a groundbreaking moment in television history, the first Native American ever to play a native character on screen. Jay Silverheels became a household name as Tonto in The Lone Ranger, the loyal companion who helped define an era of TV heroes. But behind the applause and fame hid a story that was anything but heroic. In 1957, when asked about the role that made him famous, Jay gave an answer that stunned everyone. 3 bitter words: Tonto is stupid. That statement wasn't just frustration, it was pain wrapped in years of silent struggle. While his white co-star earned double his pay, Jay fought to be treated as more than just a sidekick. On set, he endured humiliation, even once facing physical aggression from a director who saw him as less than equal. And the name Tonto? To many, it was iconic, but to Jay, it carried a darker meaning, one that followed him everywhere, a word that translated to fool in Spanish, mocking the very identity he tried to represent with pride. This is the untold truth of Jay Silverheels, a man who broke barriers on screen but was broken by the system behind it. The story of a pioneer who smiled for the camera even when Hollywood refused to see his worth. Jay Silverheels wasn't always known by that name. He was born Harold J. Smith on May 26, 1812, at the Six Nations of the Grand River Reserve near Hagersville, Ontario. He grew up in a crowded Mohawk household, one of at least 10 children squeezed into a tiny home. His father, Alexander George Edwin Smith, was a respected Cayuga war hero who earned the Military Cross for his bravery during World War I. But the man who returned from war wasn't the same one who left. The artillery fire had left him partially deaf and emotionally scarred. He struggled to provide for his family, living off a $49 monthly pension from the Canadian government. His medals couldn't feed his children, and his pain never went away. Harold grew up watching his father battle constant headaches and silence that medicine couldn't fix. His mother, Mabel, carried a strength that held the family together. She was part Mohawk and part Seneca, and she relied on traditional remedies because doctors wouldn't treat indigenous families. Whatever little they had came from trade, land, and herbal medicine. Poverty wasn't just a phase, it was a way of life they had to fight through every single day. By the time Harold was 5, his natural athleticism was already showing. He was fast, lightning fast. He'd sprint through local lacrosse games on the reserve, leaving everyone behind in a blur. By 19, he was playing professional box lacrosse for the Toronto Tecumsehs, going by the name Harry Smith. His brothers and cousins, nicknamed Porky, Beef, and Chubby, played alongside him. Together, they traveled from Buffalo to Atlantic City, living off the game and escaping poverty one match at a time. It was during this time that Harold earned the nickname Silverheels. He got it after outrunning a defender so quickly that his shoes seemed to flash silver. The name stuck, and soon, Jay Silverheels was the one fans came to watch. Newspapers wrote about him, crowds came for his speed. At one point, he was scoring over 4 goals per game, forcing coaches to assign 2 men just to stop him. But even success on the field couldn't shield him from the harsh reality of being Indigenous in Canada. During his youth, residential schools were tearing families apart, punishing Native children for speaking their language or practicing their culture. Students at Six Nations were beaten for speaking Mohawk. Some were even forced to eat soap. One of Harold's sisters was sent away and came back unable to speak their language fluently. It was cultural erasure happening in real time. The government called his people lazy and unfit to compete, spreading lies that sunk into everyday life. That prejudice followed Harold wherever he went, on and off the field. When the Great Depression struck in the 1930s, things got worse. His family moved to Buffalo, struggling to survive. Harold took whatever jobs he could find, farm work, odd labor, anything that paid. His father could barely move without pain, and his mother traded away family heirlooms just to put food on the table. The rations they got from the government were often spoiled, and every day felt like a fight for survival. But Harold never stopped moving. His athletic skills became his ticket out. In 1932, he went fully professional, earning $75 per game, a huge amount during those tough times. But his temper sometimes got the better of him. In one Montreal game, a rough foul led to a brawl, and Harold was suspended after throwing punches. Ironically, when he returned, ticket sales tripled. People wanted to see the man who played hard and fought harder. Soon, Harold tried something new, boxing. He entered the Golden Gloves tournament at Madison Square Garden as a middleweight. He made it all the way to the semifinals before a brutal blow shattered his jaw in 2 places. The injury ended his boxing career, but the prize money kept him alive. He lost 25 pounds while recovering on a liquid diet, but he learned something valuable: how to endure pain and keep going. In 1937, while on a lacrosse tour in Los Angeles, fate stepped in. During a sprint at Gilmore Stadium, actor and comedian Joe E. Brown spotted him and offered him a small film role. He accepted. The job involved a stunt, a diving catch that took 11 takes to perfect. For that single stunt, he was paid $150, twice what he earned playing lacrosse. That moment changed everything. Harold joined the Screen Actors Guild, took on the stage name Jay Silverheels, and by the end of that year, he had appeared in 5 films. It wasn't easy. Hollywood didn't welcome him with open arms. He worked as a stuntman by day, making less than $20, and bussed tables at night to pay rent. Still, he kept pushing forward. And in 1941, after years of being just another face in the crowd, he finally got a speaking role. By then, he'd already appeared in over 15 films, mostly as Indian Scout or Warrior Number 2. Still, he refused to quit. A friend once told him, "If you can read Shakespeare, you can read anything." So he studied Shakespeare, even though he doubted it was for him at first. It made him sharper, more confident.
During World War II, he served his country, though few records remain of his time in the military. When he returned to Hollywood in 1945, he tried again, this time using the name Jay Silvers. But the industry was still the same. Native actors were rarely taken seriously, and white men in brown makeup kept taking their roles. In 1946, desperate for another chance, Jay auditioned for Captain from Castile. He even starved himself just to fit into his suit. The director, like so many before him, made him remove his shirt again. It was humiliating, but Jay got the part. Sadly, the film didn't do well, and even with lines, he wasn't credited. Still, he kept pushing forward. When he wasn't acting, he played lacrosse, traveling across the southern United States with his team. That's when the harsh reality of racism hit him hardest. Hotels refused him rooms. Restaurants wouldn't serve him food. While his white teammates slept in comfort, Jay spent nights on the team bus. Once in Louisville, police threatened him just for using a whites-only bathroom. It wasn't rare. It was everyday life. Those experiences would later fuel his determination to fight for better representation for Native people in film and television. Years passed before Hollywood truly noticed him. Then, in 1948, everything changed. Director John Huston cast Jay in Key Largo, alongside legends Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. He played Tom Osceola, a small role, but for the first time his name appeared in the credits. The movie was filmed on the Warner Brothers backlot for 78 days, and while the world saw Florida on screen, Jay saw his first real break in Hollywood. 2 years later, in 1950, he landed another role in Broken Arrow. The movie claimed to show Native Americans in a better light, but it still gave the lead role of Cochise to Jeff Chandler, a white actor from Brooklyn painted in dark makeup. Jay played Geronimo, and though it wasn't the lead, he gave the character strength and pride. Real Apache people worked as background extras, while Jay, a Canadian Mohawk, brought Geronimo to life with authenticity and respect. Still, the irony wasn't lost on him or anyone watching. Even a progressive film couldn't let a real Native actor lead. Then, everything changed again. In 1949, The Lone Ranger came to television. Jay Silverheels beat out 35 other actors for the role of Tonto. When the show premiered on September 15th, history was made. For the first time, a Native American actor played a Native American character on TV. Back then, Hollywood's idea of a native look was to smear dark clay on Italian actors. Jay's casting broke that ugly tradition. He wasn't supposed to win the role, but he did, and it changed his life forever. Still, there was one problem that never went away: the name Tonto. In Spanish, it means fool or stupid. Jay knew that, but he had no power to change it. Publicly, he smiled and played the part. Privately, he resented it deeply. Years later, in 1957, when he visited his home reserve in Ontario, someone asked how he felt about the role that made him famous. He didn't hesitate. "Tonto is stupid," he said plainly. Just 3 words, but they carried a lifetime of frustration. The name stuck for decades, even as Native communities spoke out about its insult. And when Johnny Depp played Tonto in 2013, the controversy came back all over again. After all those years, it was clear Hollywood hadn't changed nearly as much as it liked to pretend. Jay Silverheels was known for something unusual. He rarely read his lines, but it wasn't because he was lazy. It was because the scripts given to him were full of broken English, written to sound authentic, but far from how real Native people spoke. So instead of sticking to the script, Jay often made up his own lines on the spot. Simple, clipped phrases like, "Me wait here, you go into town, that right?" The audience loved it. The directors did not. Alan Dinehart once recalled how a director named Wilhelm Teichel got so angry at Jay in 1955 that he had to be physically restrained from attacking him on set. But Jay had one powerful ally, Clayton Moore, the man behind the mask of the Lone Ranger. Whenever arguments broke out, Moore would step in and say, "Let it play. It sounds more natural." He understood what Jay was trying to do, make the character feel real. But Hollywood didn't want real. It wanted stereotypes, and Jay was forced to deliver them. Behind the cameras, things weren't much better. The show's budget was tight, just $12,500 per episode. That meant cutting corners everywhere. Jay and Clayton didn't even have dressing rooms at first. They had to change their clothes in a gas station restroom down the road. The long days under the scorching Chatsworth sun made it worse. Their heavy suede and wool costumes felt like ovens. One day, Jay had enough. He refused to dress for the shoot until something changed. Clayton warned him that a delay could cost people their jobs, but Jay stood firm. The next day, private dressing rooms were waiting for them. It was a small victory, but to Jay, it meant respect. He could have just coasted on his fame. The Lone Ranger was a massive success, one of the top shows on television. It ranked 7th in the Nielsen ratings during the 1950-51 season and stayed in the top 30 for years. Across 8 seasons, they filmed 221 episodes. But Jay couldn't shake the unease inside him. He didn't like what Tonto had become, the silent sidekick, always speaking in broken English, never seen as equal. Jay was smart, articulate, and deeply proud of his heritage, but the show didn't let him be any of those things. Then something happened that brought everything to a halt. In 1955, during a fight scene rehearsal, a stuntman accidentally fell on Jay. Clayton noticed Jay walking oddly afterwards and followed him to his trailer. There, he found Jay clutching his chest. He was having a heart attack. Despite being a strong athlete, a former lacrosse champion and Golden Gloves boxer, he was a heavy smoker, and it caught up with him. He was out for 8 weeks recovering. To explain his absence, writers introduced a new character, Dan Reed, and said Tonto was in Washington meeting the Great White Father. The line was meant to be simple, but it said much more than they realized, a reflection of how little understanding Hollywood had of Native culture. Away from the spotlight, Jay was just Harold Smith, a family man. He married Mary Doma in 1945, and they had 4 children together: Jay Jr., Marilyn, Pamela, and Karen. From his first marriage to Bobby Smith, he had 2 more, Steve and Gail. He often joked about their mixed heritage. On The Tonight Show, he once said he married an Italian to get back at Christopher Columbus and called their kids Inditalians. It was funny, but beneath the humor was a truth. Jay carried the pride and pain of his ancestry. His grandfather had been a respected Mohawk chief, and Jay grew up on the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario. Hollywood's version of Indians was nothing like the people he knew, their strength, intelligence, and dignity. Still, he tried to bring a touch of that truth into his roles whenever he could.
In 1953, Jay took on another native role, Tonto, a Kiowa chief in the film War Arrow. It wasn't a starring part, but it put him alongside big names like Maureen O'Hara and Jeff Chandler. Filming took place across Arizona and California, capturing the desert landscapes in vibrant Technicolor. Originally, the movie was packed with thrilling action scenes, but the director, George Sherman, later cut many of them out, replacing them with long conversations that explained the story instead of showing it. Even the studio admitted that the changes hurt the film. Still, it had strong stunts and stunning visuals. Maureen O'Hara later said that Chandler was a nice man, though not the most exciting actor. As for Jay, his character once again stood slightly outside the story's center, present, powerful, but never fully seen. It was symbolic of how Hollywood treated native actors at the time, visible but voiceless. In 1954, Jay Silverheels took on another supporting role in Drums Across the River. This time, he played a character named T.A. in a Western film directed by Nathan Juran and starring the legendary Audie Murphy. The movie was shot in vibrant Technicolor across some of California's most stunning landscapes, including Barton Flats and Red Rock Canyon. The story followed Murphy's character, a young man trying to prevent a war with the Ute tribe while being wrongly accused of a crime. Silverheels' role wasn't just a background figure. His character carried the voice of native people, caught in a story about land, justice, and cultural conflict. The movie featured thrilling horseback chases, intense fights, and a daring stunt that critics called the leap of death. For Silverheels, those physical scenes came naturally. Before Hollywood, he'd been an athlete, a skilled lacrosse player and boxer, so stunts were second nature to him. He was joined on screen by Morris Ankrum, who played Chief Uray. The film cost about $1 million to make, which was considered a huge budget at the time. After the Lone Ranger TV series ended in 1956 and stopped airing the following year, Silverheels returned to the big screen as Tonto in two feature films, The Lone Ranger, 1956, and The Lone Ranger and the Lost City of Gold, 1958. The second film, shot in Eastman color and released by United Artists, ran for 81 minutes and starred Silverheels alongside Clayton Moore once again. The movie did fairly well, not a major hit, but not a flop either. Still, the aftermath wasn't easy. The role of Tonto made Jay Silverheels famous, but it also trapped him in one image. Hollywood began to see him as only one thing: the native sidekick. That label followed him everywhere. In the 1960s, he appeared in a string of westerns and TV shows like Wagon Train, Wanted Dead or Alive, Rawhide, Laramie, Daniel Boone, and The Virginian. But no matter how strong his performance was, his characters rarely changed. He was always the same type: stoic, quiet, and sidelined. On Daniel Boone, he appeared 3 times between 1964 and 1965, often in small roles with little dialogue. During the Lone Ranger years, he earned about $100,000 per season, which would be roughly $850,000 today. A solid income, but still only half of what his co-star Clayton Moore made. That pay gap stayed with him throughout his career. As the 1960s rolled on, America began to change. The native rights movement was growing, and for the first time, Hollywood's portrayal of native people came under fire. not from critics, but from Native activists themselves. They began questioning whether characters like Tonto truly represented their communities or just reinforced stereotypes. One scholar even described Tonto as an Indian step-and-fetch-it, comparing him to the old caricatures used to mock black people. Russell Means, a leader of the American Indian movement, went further, using Tonto as an insult, the native equivalent of calling someone an Uncle Tom. Silverheels found himself torn. The character that made him a household name was now seen by many as a symbol of the problem. His once bright career started to fade, not because he lost his talent, but because studios became afraid of the backlash. Even his fame couldn't shield him from the new reality. But Jay Silverheels wasn't the kind of man to give up. Instead of disappearing, he chose to help change things. In the early 1960s, he co-founded the Indian Actors Workshop in Los Angeles. It began at the LA Indian Center, supported by well-known figures like Buffy Sainte-Marie, Iron Eyes Cody, and Rod Redwing. By 1966, the workshop had grown into a respected training space where Native actors could meet, learn, and develop their craft. One of those young actors was Michael Horse, who would later go on to play Tonto in The Legend of the Lone Ranger, 1981, and appear in Twin Peaks. In a 1973 interview, Silverheels said the goal of the workshop was simple: to unlock the creativity that already existed inside Native people. And he lived by that mission, using his own experiences to pave the way for others. Long before that, though, his personal life had its share of struggles. Back in the late 1930s, while working as a stuntman and extra in Hollywood, Jay married a woman named Bobby Smith. Their marriage ended in 1943. During those years, he was juggling small film jobs and military service in World War II. He often risked his life doing dangerous stunts in movies like The Seahawk and Western Union, earning just $50 to $75 a week, barely enough to live on. The divorce left him estranged from his two children, Steve, and a daughter whose name appears differently in records, sometimes listed as Gail, other times as Sharon. Jay Silverheels' life was a story of persistence, quiet rebellion, and unshakable pride. His journey wasn't easy, far from it. Limited income, constant travel, and the complicated rules of wartime service made it nearly impossible for him to stay close to his loved ones. But through it all, he never stopped pushing forward. A few years later, around 1945 or 1946, Jay married Mary Doma, an Italian-American woman he once joked he married just to get back at Christopher Columbus. Together, they built a family of their own. He affectionately called their children Indelians, a playful mix of Indian and Italian. They had 4 kids, Jay Jr., Marilyn, Pamela, and Karen, and eventually settled in Canoga Park, California. Then in 1949, everything changed. Jay landed the role that would make him a household name, Tonto, the loyal companion in The Lone Ranger. It made him famous, but not rich. Hollywood contracts in those days didn't offer much security, and being typecast as the Indian sidekick became both his blessing and his burden. Even after The Lone Ranger ended in 1957, Jay found himself stuck in the same kind of roles, always Tonto-like characters, always the quiet helper. During filming in 1955, he suffered a heart attack and had to take 8 weeks off, which hurt him financially. But through all the struggles, he and Mary stood together, weathering every high and low that came with a life in show business. By the early 1960s, Jay began reflecting deeply on how Native Americans were portrayed on screen, and who got the chance to portray them. Instead of shouting from the sidelines, he decided to act. In 1966, he co-founded the Indian Actors Workshop, a quiet but powerful movement to empower Native talent from within the system. He didn't believe in boycotts, saying they wouldn't have the same financial impact as those led by African Americans. Instead, he focused on what he could change: opportunity. Alongside Noble Kid Chisel and William Bassett, Jay taught acting, voice work, stunt performance, and even nutrition to young Native actors. Classes were held weekly at places like the Los Angeles Indian Center and a Methodist church in Echo Park. Their goal was simple: help Native actors get into the Screen Actors Guild, earn better roles, and gradually reshape Hollywood's view of indigenous people. Not everyone supported his approach. Activists like Russell Means saw Tonto as a damaging stereotype, a character mocked as submissive and foolish. Some even turned the word Tonto into a slur. But Jay didn't waver. He believed real change came not from tearing walls down, but from teaching others how to walk through them. He even wrote letters to President Eisenhower, Vice President Nixon, and top TV executives, urging them to offer more respectful portrayals of Native people. The workshop grew beyond acting. It addressed community issues like alcoholism and elder care. It became a place of pride, healing, and hope. By the 1970s, Jay found a new passion: harness racing. He earned a provisional driver's license in 1974 and trained horses at Hollywood Park. His fame helped bring attention to the sport, and in 1996, long after his passing, a horse named Jay Silverheels broke a track record at Los Alamitos, with his widow Mary and son Jay Jr. proudly watching. But Jay himself never got to see that moment. In 1975, just as more meaningful roles were coming his way, he suffered a series of strokes that left him partially paralyzed. Another stroke in 1976 severely affected his speech. Yet even in frailty, his spirit remained strong. On July 17, 1979, just months before his death, Jay received his long-overdue star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Surrounded by Native dancers, he sat in his wheelchair, unable to say much, but his presence said everything. It was a moment of quiet triumph for a man who had spent a lifetime speaking through action. He passed away on March 5, 1980, at age 67, from complications of a stroke and pneumonia. His ashes were returned to his birthplace, the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario, the land where his story began. His son, Jay Silverheels Jr., carried on the legacy, appearing in The Legend of the Lone Ranger in 1981. Ironically, the film was a disaster, plagued by production issues and controversy, but Jay Jr. continued working in television, determined to keep the door open for other Native actors. When Jay launched the Indian Actors Workshop back in 1966, he said its purpose was to tap into the dormant creativity of the Indians. And that creativity didn't stay dormant for long. The Indian Actors Workshop's influence could be felt decades later in the rise of actors like Graham Greene, who earned an Oscar nomination for Dances with Wolves, and in groundbreaking films like Smoke Signals, the first movie written, directed, and produced entirely by Native Americans. Jay Silverheels' name remains etched not only in Hollywood's Walk of Fame, but in the very foundation of Native cinema. He was posthumously inducted into the Western Performers Hall of Fame in 1993 and the Canadian Lacrosse Hall of Fame in 1997 under his birth name, Harry Tonto Smith. His portrait still hangs proudly at Shea's Performing Arts Center in Buffalo. His legacy lives in every Native storyteller who refuses to be silenced, in every actor, writer, or director who demands more than stereotypes. Jay once said he cringed inside every time he had to deliver Tonto's broken English lines. But instead of resentment, he turned that discomfort into purpose.
In 1969, he appeared on The Tonight Show as Tonto and, with a mischievous grin, said, "My name is Tonto. I hail from Toronto, and I speak Esperanto." It was a small moment, but it said everything. Even when the words weren't his, Jay Silverheels always found a way to make the stage his own. Jay's story is a reminder that real change doesn't always come from loud protest. Sometimes it begins with quiet courage. He didn't just play a role, he rewrote one. Through resilience, dignity, and a vision that outlived him, Jay Silverheels proved that even in silence, a man can speak volumes.